Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Paris Schutz will join us later in the program. On the show tonight, WTTW News finds that developers donating tens of thousands to the mayoral campaign of Aurora Mayor Richard Irvin got tens of millions in city contracts.
A firefighter and a teacher pay more than double the tax rate that a billionaire pays.
President Joe Biden's budget targets higher taxes for the wealthy. And what an increase in international passengers could mean for Chicago's travel economy. But first, some of today's top stories. Step aside Willie Wilson, the city is rolling out its own giveaway to help motorists and travelers amid high gas prices.
I know from talking to many residents that they are feeling the strain. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And many are unable to fill their tank as much as they normally would because their dollars just don't stretch that far. So my administration has been working through a variety of options to see how we can provide the greatest relief to as many residents as we can.
The initiative is called Chicago Moves and will distribute $12.5 million in prepaid gas cards worth $150 each and transit passes worth $50 apiece. If City Council approves the plan, residents age 18 and up with a household income at or below 140% of Chicago's median income and a valid city vehicle sticker can apply. Mayor Lori Lightfoot selects the city's next inspector general. Lightfoot names Deborah Witzberg, the former deputy IG for public safety, as the city's top watchdog, a role tasked with investigating, auditing, and reviewing Chicago government. Witzberg had been second in command of the IG's office since 2019 under Joe Ferguson, who stepped down as IG 5.5 months ago. Witzberg's appointment is still in need of City Council approval. A state-owned building inspiring awe and ire has finally been sold. Governor J.B. Pritzker announces Illinois has signed a $70 million sales agreement with developer Prime Group to sell the Thompson Center. As part of the deal, the building will be preserved as a mixed-use building featuring office, retail, and hotel space, while Illinois retains 30% ownership. The postmodern building, designed by late architect Helmut Jahn in the mid-1980s, is admired by some architecture critics, but also the source of frustration from office workers who decry its dilapidated condition and inefficient heating and cooling system, among other complaints. Starting tomorrow, beware where you park your car. Chicago's annual street sweeping season is beginning. From April until mid-November or later, streets and sanitation trucks will be sweeping and clearing leaves and debris accumulated during the winter. Motorists are reminded to check for bright orange signs where sweeping is planned. The city says these signs are posted 2 days prior to scheduled sweeps. Up next, new details on a WTTW News investigation involving Republican candidate for governor Richard Irvin. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
New revelations tonight about Republican gubernatorial candidate Richard Irvin. On Monday, WTTW News reported on a company that had donated big to campaign funds connected to the Aurora mayor and got lucrative city contracts and legislation. Irvin is, of course, backed to the tune of $20 million by the state's wealthiest resident, Ken Griffin. Now, a WTTW examination of further campaign filings and city contracts shows developers that donated tens of thousands to campaign funds connected to Irvin and his former law partner stand to receive tens of millions from Aurora taxpayers. Nick Blumberg and Paris Schutz join us now for the latest in this investigation. Paris, let's start with you.
Well, Brandis, Griffin has stated that he believes Irvin is the candidate to clean up waste and corruption in Springfield. But as you mentioned, WTTW has reviewed campaign filings and Aurora City records. We found two development companies that had donated nearly $100,000 in two funds connected to Irvin and his former private practice law partner, Brittany Pedersen. Those firms stand to receive, all told, more than $30 million from Aurora taxpayers in the form of incentives and benefits. Now, Ms. Pedersen is running as a Democrat for Kane County judge. This all follows our reporting on Monday about a telecommunications company, Scientel Solutions, that through the company and employees donated more than $135,000 to funds connected to Irvin and Pedersen and won millions in contracts from the city and legislation backed by Irvin that allowed them to build a lucrative communications tower.
And now, Nick, you found another firm that's also donated heavily and that received incentives from the city.
That's right, Brandis. You know, redeveloping Aurora's downtown has long been a priority for city leaders. In 2019, the City Council approved a deal with JH Real Estate Partners to redevelop the historic Hobbs building, which was long vacant and in disrepair. The deal called for a $13 million overhaul of the Hobbs, shown in a rendering here, as well as two buildings next door that JH already owned to create apartments and commercial space. Now, as part of the deal, JH got the Hobbs building for free. That's a $300,000 value, according to the assessment. It got a $1.5 million grant and a $1.5 million bridge loan from the city. And the city also created a new TIF district that covers the three buildings. JH stands to get 80%, as much as 80%, of the new tax revenue over the next 20 plus years to pay for redevelopment costs. Now, since 2019, the year the deal was approved, JH, its owners, and other companies they control have donated nearly $10,000 to Irvin's mayoral campaign fund, more than $16,000 to ex-law partner Brittany Pedersen's judicial campaign fund, and $48,000 to the Build Our Future PAC that's controlled by Irvin's mayoral campaign manager. Now, in an email, JH's owners told us the donations were only because they supported Irvin's vision for Aurora, saying, quote, Richard Irvin has been pro-business and has been very supportive in the overall development in downtown Aurora, and they add the crime rate in downtown Aurora has dwindled dramatically.
Now, Paris, another project, Pacifica Square. Tell us about that one.
Yeah, Brandis, Pacifica Square is a 360,000 square foot Asian-themed mall and shopping center in Aurora, developed by a company called Windfall Properties. City records show that the project stands to receive north of $17 million in tax incentives. Now, this developer also won a contract to develop prime riverfront property near downtown Aurora with a total of nearly $9 million in public incentives. The city voted to donate the land to them for free, and then another $7 million in forgivable loans and cash to get the project started. Now, campaign filings show that Pacifica Square, a company called Pacific Square with the same owners, and two of the company principals donated a total of $25,000 to Irvin's campaign fund. Now, Windfall owner Eddie Nee, which is seen here in a video, surprising Irvin with a large birthday cake on his birthday in 2018, he is a familiar name. He is the developer that, in conversations recorded by Danny Solis, agreed to hire Mike Madigan's law firm to be able to develop state-owned land in Chinatown. Nee wanted to build on state-owned land there in Chinatown. This is part of Madigan's sprawling federal corruption case. Now, with respect to Aurora, Nee told us, quote, if you don't have the right incentives, nobody would do business here. Now, Irvin and Pedersen and a spokesperson for the city of Aurora have declined to return our calls.
Okay, so Nick, is it unusual for a political leader to accept campaign money from folks that get this kind of business with the city?
Well, in Illinois, no. And we should point out that no one involved in the story has been accused of any wrongdoing. But campaign finance reform advocates say that Illinois' laws are weak, and that leads to candidates who aren't necessarily independently wealthy accepting these large donations. Now, Elisa Kaplan, who leads the group Reform for Illinois, she says when companies doing business with the municipality also donate big to local politicians, that can erode constituents' trust. She says limits on how much companies who want to do business with the city can donate to political campaigns can help address the issue. And she pointed out that in 22 states and at the federal level, companies cannot give directly to campaigns or to candidates, but that in Illinois, it's legal. Now, in a statement, the Irvin campaign says under Mayor Irvin's tenure, Aurora has seen more economic development than at any time in the city's recent history, and his proven track record of revitalizing Aurora is in stark contrast to J.B. Pritzker, who has driven thousands of families and businesses out of Illinois with his high-tax pro-criminal agenda. Brandis?
Okay, good reporting from Nick Blumberg and Paris Schutz. Thanks to you both.
Thank you.
Up next, two local economists weigh in on President Biden's budget proposal. But first, a look at the weather. Stay with us. President Joe Biden's proposed $5.8 trillion budget aims to provide more money for police, education, public health, and housing, while at the same time lowering the federal deficit. In order to help make the numbers add up, he intends to raise taxes on people earning more than $400,000 a year. He's also proposing a minimum 20% income tax for households worth more than $100 million.
For most Americans, the last few years were very hard, stretching them to the breaking point. But billionaires and large corporations got richer than ever. Right now, billionaires pay an average rate of 8% on their total income. 8%, that's the average they pay. Now, I'm a capitalist, but if you can make $1 billion, great. Just pay your fair share.
So our dynamic duo is back to give us their take. Edward Stewart, Professor Emeritus of Economics at Northeastern Illinois University, and Michael Miller, Associate Professor of Economics at DePaul University. Michael Miller, let's start with you, please. So we currently have inflation at a 40-year high. We are just barely emerging from this pandemic, and that's hopefully, and of course, there's this major war in Europe. How would you assess the state of the U.S. economy right now and the challenges it faces?
Well, it's a good, bad thing. Two bad things are we have inflation, and it's not just some inflation, it's a lot of inflation, but I'm hoping it's temporary. It will, in fact, be down dramatically by the end of the year. And that, of course, has weighed heavily on consumer confidence. But when you look at the labor market, it's as good of a labor market as we have essentially ever had. And GDP is growing near its potential, which means it can continue to grow for a long time without creating additional inflationary pressures. So I think the economy is in pretty good shape with the exception of that price problem.
So, Edward Stewart, we just heard President Biden's rationale for wanting to raise taxes on those earning more than $400,000, as well as households that are earning more than $100 million. How much additional revenue could that raise, and is it enough to sort of balance the books?
Probably not enough to balance the books, but enough to make a sizable dent. I think President Biden's budget forecasts reducing the deficit from 5% of GDP to about 3% of GDP, and that's a pretty good step in 1 year. So it's not going to cover the entire deficit, but you don't want to close the deficit too fast because we do have a growing economy. We have a pretty healthy labor market, and we don't want to choke off this economic recovery. We're still below, in terms of employment especially, we're still below where we were in February of 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic. We have less jobs than we have then, and we have more of a population. So we need to still expand employment significantly in the coming years.
So the super wealthy, under the president's proposal, super wealthy would pay a minimum of 20% on their income. The corporate tax rate would rise to 28%. The top individual tax rate would go up to just under 40%. Michael Miller, as an economist, what does adjusting the tax system in that way, what does it do to the economy? What are the, the ups and downs of that?
You have to look at it from two perspectives. If you look at purely through the lens of the tax, does a tax have a stimulative or a contractionary effect? And there's no doubt that it has a contractionary effect. Work from all kinds of macroeconomists and advisors to Mr. Obama and so forth have concluded that. However, what the point of the tax increase is to fund Mr. Biden's spending program. He did promise this when he was running for president, and elections have consequences, and he is delivering on what it was he promised he would bring. And if I could say anything, I would be rather happy that, in fact, if he's going to spend more, he's not going to print the money to do so. He's going to raise the taxes necessary to pay for it. And if you're ever going to raise taxes, you do so when an economy is doing very well. You don't do it when the economy is in trouble.
So the budget is said to assume that the inflation, as you said, will return to normal from current 40-year highs. Ed Stewart, I think everybody cries when we go to get gas these days. Is it a reasonable assumption?
It's a pretty reasonable assumption, and I think one of the things that has to be clear is that this inflation that's being driven by supply-side issues like energy prices is a worldwide problem. You hear a lot of commentary that, President Biden has presided over the increase in energy costs or increase in inflation. Everywhere has inflation. I was talking to the producers before this. I just came back from Portugal early this month. People in Portugal are paying about $9 a gallon for gasoline. Austria and Germany announced today that they may be instituting a national program of rationing for natural gas. So it's a worldwide problem. Eventually, energy prices will stabilize and probably come down, but it may be 6 months to a year before that happens. I'm still worried that the Fed is going to be tightening too much and will choke off demand, and demand is not the main reason why prices are going up. We have to end the war in Ukraine. We have to get better energy efficiency, that's one of the things in the budget of President Biden that is one of the key spending components is to increase energy efficiency and to invest in infrastructure, which will have long-term productivity benefits for the economy and bring down the long-term inflation rate. Short-term inflation, I'm afraid I don't have any good news, and it's everywhere. It's not just in the United States.
So the deficit for fiscal year 2023 would be $1.15 trillion. The U.S. national debt in February had already surpassed $30 trillion. So it's hard for us to get our head around numbers that large. But Michael Miller, presumably the U.S. can't run deficits like this just forever.
Well, based upon the forecast that I saw in the presentation of the budget, there are going to be deficits of over $1 trillion for the next 10 years. But understand as well that the economy is growing. So in nominal terms, if you compare the size of the deficit to the size of the economy, it's not changing dramatically. It's about 4.5% of GDP is going to be in the form of the deficit. We also see that according to the projection from the president himself, the national debt will rise to just under $40 trillion. Now, that will be a little bit higher percentage of GDP than we have right now, but not dramatically higher. Okay. So in some sense, the people who are not, I prefer a smaller government with enumerated powers.
And Mike Miller,
but if I'm going to have it large, then doing it such that you pay for it now makes much more sense.
All right, that's where we'll have to leave it. My thanks again to Michael Miller and Ed Stewart for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Brandis.
You got it.
Up next, international travel takes off at O'Hare. What it could mean for the city's travel economy. Stay with us. Fasten your seatbelt. International travel is taking off at O'Hare International Airport. So much so that U.S. Customs and Border Protection is predicting the airport may exceed pre-pandemic passenger levels. Joining us to talk more about this is LaFonda Sutton-Burke, Director of Field Operations for the Chicago Field Office of U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Director, thank you for joining us. First, as the Director for the Chicago Field Office, tell us a bit about your role at O'Hare.
I am responsible for the Chicago area port that is managed by the area port director, Shane Campbell. I'm also responsible for 3 other areas within the Chicago field office, the area port of St. Louis, the area port of Minneapolis, and the area port of Cleveland. So overall, about 28 ports of entry within this area of responsibility.
And I would imagine because of Chicago's position, it's a big area to be in charge of.
Yes, it is. It's in the top 10 in the United States.
So since October, your office has processed more than 1.73 million international travelers through O'Hare. You are expecting to get up to pre-pandemic or exceed pre-pandemic numbers of 6 million passengers. That was in 2019. To what do you attribute this volume in travelers?
I think the bottom line is that the COVID restrictions are lifting, the mask requirements are lifting. We have a low rate of infections that are occurring, and so more and more people are becoming more confident and comfortable in traveling.
Do you have any concern, because obviously we're talking about this new Omicron subvariant, stealth Omicron, any concern about the impact that might have on your travel numbers?
Well, as you stated, we're at about 1.73 million over the last 6 months. This same time last year, we were at 700,000 passengers, the same time frame, which today we're at a 148% increase. The entire fiscal year for FY or fiscal year 21 was 2.2 million passengers. So we do feel that we're going to be on track to, exceed the numbers that we received, not only in 21, but in FY 20, we had 2.7 million passengers total. And we are implementing, or we have implemented several things to help facilitate the flow and decrease wait times, such as the Trusted Traveler programs, TSA PreCheck, the global entry, which decreases passenger processing times from 60 seconds down to about 5 seconds, and then also simplified arrival biometric facial comparison, which is touchless, and it allows for that, decrease of spreading germs and protecting not only the traveler, but also my staff.
Because that was going to be my next question. As you mentioned, in fiscal year 2021, there were over 2.2 million travelers compared to 2.7 million in 2020. How does your office prepare differently as those numbers fluctuate? I mean, you said this time a year ago, it was just 700,000 at this time.
That's true. So trade and travel facilitation is our primary mission, but we are not going to compromise national security. But some of the things that we do to prepare is that we monitor the wait times. We ensure that we're communicating with our stakeholders, such as Chicago Department of Aviation and all of the airlines that are, operating within the Chicago area port.
And what are some of the best ways for travelers to stay up to date on international COVID restrictions and changes?
I think the best way, one thing I would like to just add is, ensure you have a valid passport or a Trusted Traveler Program card or enhanced driver's license or tribal card. But you can also check the CDC website, Centers of Disease Control website, to ensure you have the most updated information on ensuring that you have your vaccination card with you, and that you attest to the fact that you are vaccinated when you travel. And I would also recommend that U.S. citizens also look at the peak hours and maybe attempt to travel during non-peak hours.
Big COVID waves in other parts of the world. I think right now some countries in Europe are experiencing this. How do those waves affect the traffic flow that you see or expect to see here?
Well, currently, we don't anticipate that those waves will be an impact based on the communications that we've received with the airlines. However, to be honest, there are timeframes when if it's a high surge in a country, those countries are limiting the ability for the individuals to fly in and out. So it depends really on the rate, either low, medium, or high, if there will be any challenges with those flights coming in.
Okay, and briefly before we let you go, Director, you mentioned a number of programs, Trusted Traveler Program, TSA PreCheck, Global Entry. What's the best place for a traveler to go to learn more information about those programs and if it's right for them?
So I recommend to go to cbp.gov, it's U.S. Customs and Border Protection.gov. You can also go into Google search for Global Entry our Google search for TSA PreCheck. And I do believe that for global entry, the Chicago field office at 610 South Canal Street has a global entry processing office, and so does the International Airport.
All right, a lot of good information. LaFonda Sutton-Burke, Director of Field Operations at Customs and Border Protection, Chicago Field Office, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabee family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Thursday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. And please join us tomorrow night at 7 for the Weekend Review. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm dedicated to preserving the dignity and rights of all individuals.
She was a daughter of Chicago's Democratic political machine.
Jane was tough in essentially an all-male domain.
This woman was going to assume the desk of Mayor Daley? Not possible.
She promised to fight for one Chicago, to fight anyone who stood in her way.
I think your questions are both insulting and stupid. Excuse me.
Jane Byrne on Chicago Stories. Friday at 8 on WTTW.
Next time. During a party, a wealthy businessman kills himself.
He was prone to depression.
But evidence points to murder.
The victim's body was moved after he died.
And with Florence away, the team needs reinforcement.
Nice to meet you, Dwayne. You're even more pale and pasty than they said you were.
But will this reunion actually help the investigation?
I've got a bad feeling about this.
Death in